rosse bandiere, o proletari alla riscossa, bandiera rossa trionferà. Bandiera rossa deve trionfar, bandiera rossa deve trionfar, bandiera rossa deve trionfar, e viva il comunismo e la libertà, avanti il popolo alla riscossa, bandiera rossa, bandiera rossa.
And thank you very much. Very thought-provoking and provocative comments to get us to look wider, and that's the whole idea of having an international network. Although this is centered on a US issue, we need to also sort of widen it out as well internationally. So thank you very much for those comments, and I'm sure people will definitely come back. The last speaker is going to be Jabu, but I must say we've only got one hand raised. You've been very patient, so now's the time to think if you want to come into the discussion, click on that participants and raise that little blue hand. If you
I see Datrian is with us now.
Okay, don't worry, John. The time's rolling on, so if Datrian wants to speak, can she raise her hand and then I'll bring her in early. So can Jabu speak next? Are you there, Jabu? If you are, unmute, please.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, hello everybody. Oh my God, I've got chills after Thando for speaking. I'm Jabu, but I'm based in the UK. And basically, I am originally also from South Africa. So you've got two South African women following each other, but I am Amandla. I'm based in the UK. One of the important, crucial things that's been going on in Oxford, UK, where I am based, is basically trying to also form some sort of international solidarity with what's going on in the US, and whilst capturing some of our own discourse in where we live in Oxford. One of the ways that I've always sort of try to invoke our struggles here in Oxford is to talk about the global struggle as being intertwined. My background, of course, has played an important role, as Thando has explained, about the historical context of apartheid in South Africa. I bring it up often because this is quite important in terms of looking at overt and inovert racism that's taken place in the UK. The tendency in the UK is to talk about South Africa in a context of seeing that sort of country as being more kind of brutal, because the legalized type of state racism in comparison to institutionalized racism, which has got a lot of diversity laws that are quite prominent in the UK, and yet the practical nature of what is going on in terms of our Black communities does not reflect the latter. So the Black Lives Matter movement has definitely kind of sort of taken up in Oxford. It's not a new thing. It's a renewed effort. But obviously, as you can see internationally, everybody has kind of brought out all their frustrations with the systems that we have, which are quite connected in terms of capitalism that is oppressing all of us. In Oxford, we've had issues of police brutality as well, with regards to local deaths of young men in the hands of the police. Adam Stanmore, Nuno Kudose, who was killed, Ruskin College student, which is a workers' college. So it's quite interesting that I bring up workers' college, Ruskin College. Ruskin College is a college which my mother, who was David Hansen, who invited me, has worked with my mother. My mother was in the trade unions in South Africa. She was one of the first GS in Mau, which later became NUMSA. So the the intensification of racism in Oxford towards our communities has led to different initiatives in terms of the Oxford being an anti-racist city. But in terms of seeing progress, it's been quite slow. And we've had the Rhodes Must Fall movement going on as backdated as from like 2016, when we had it was also led by quite a lot of South Africans like Ntokozo Kwabe, who was also a South African. So we have led quite a few like anti-iconography protest around Oxford, as long as also around the UK as well. I mean, you saw the Bristol, I don't know if any of you were able to see the Bristol uprisings, where you saw the statue of Colston, who was a slave master, which was pulled down and rolled across Brixton and thrown in the river. So the context of what is going on globally has actually kind of influenced mass mobilization right across the UK, right across Oxford. Right now, even today, as Tando was speaking about the LGBTQ community, we had a big march earlier on, which was speaking about the same sort of issues, that we have to take on all sorts of struggles in an intersection way, because also the people that are in those communities are also oppressed, and it should not be seen as separate. And it was interesting also to bring up the fact that I mean, I've got a program that we're doing here, which is called Mothers for Justice, where recently we've called the police in Oxford to come and speak to us about racism to our young men around the stop and search powers that they have, which are given to the police in the UK, where they predominantly stop young Black people, and some have resulted in violence, and some have resulted in death in custody of these young people or Black men. And the interesting thing is that when you bring up these issues, they tend to look at the US and see the UK as being less of an offender in terms of how the police are perceived. And the interesting thing is that the police were prepared to come and speak about it, but it's the defensive nature of how the police are towards the way they police the community. When we say to the police, no, we are trying to speak to the police, because what we're trying to do is look for a police service rather than a police force that is forcing Black bodies into a situation whereby it results, the confrontation with Black people results in Black deaths, or it results in like a mass incarceration of more Black people for mostly unserious crimes, and some might be serious, but most unserious crimes or stereotypical crimes being thrown more towards the black community. So the Black Lives Matter is kind of sort of keeping momentum for now, but as in I say internationally, there is a big, great worry about the issues of how it's going to sustain itself as a movement in terms of the insurgents that we've seen right across internationally, and we are trying to kind of having a lot of discussions because of the worry of how we can maintain the momentum of having more people sort of keep this going. There's been quite a huge influx of young people. The rate of information that's going on and the dissemination of information galvanizing the communities is absolutely incredible. But like any other country or any other international issues, we face a great challenge in terms of the liberal institutions that we face. There is a mass co-opting of the kind of struggles so that they can be watered down, so that they eventually fade into non-existence because of the nature of the institutions that gain from these oppressive measures that have been instituted towards Black people in the last 400 years. And as back to Tando again, as she spoke about what went on in South Africa, I'll always try and bring in the historical context as to how we look at how this racism has re-downloaded itself in terms of what's going on in our lives. And one of the things that was interesting that was said by one of the policemen we were speaking to, when I asked whether how he thought these systems can be changed, because apparently the police are talking about reforming the system as well, because they are feeling that they are also having problems with some of its structures. And one of his answers was that perhaps we could have more Black police in the what you call in the streets. And I sat there and laughed and said, because at the end of the day, it isn't about, I said, when I say to people, Black policemen are part of the system, they're trained by the same system. The Black policeman is more likely to protect the system more than they would their brother, because they do not see their brother as they don't look at skin, they look at the vested interest of capital, which is what they are trained to do. So it's quite interesting to look at the different perspective from our different, the US, the South African system, all of them, they are intertwined. It's the same global struggle in terms of what we're faced with, and we still need to come in as an international perspective to fight this, because the divide and rule rules, they always work, because you are shown a different perspective to say, but no, it's better over there. Because even here in the UK, they were relaxing once the Black Lives Matter movement was growing in the US. Well, there was that whole sort of perspective, well, it's not so bad here. And yet we had Stephen Lawrence, we had Judge McPherson, who wrote a report about the institutional racism. Basically, to quote his exact word, was that the police were inherently racist in the UK. And as you said, as my sisters and my brothers here have drawn the parallels, it's all to do with the nature of capitalism and how we are policed. One of the things that I remember when we were children, because my mother, when we first came, when we were children, she had got a scholarship from Ruskin to study here. It was during the miners' strike when we came into the UK, the NUM, which was led by Arthur Scargill. One of the most repressive measures that has ever been implemented by the police in the UK was the beating of that miners' strike. And that's when you understood where the police stand, that they are not on the side of the workers. So I'm not going to speak a lot, because I feel like I'm going to be repeating myself, because my sister Tando really kind of outlined what is going on in terms of the Black perspective in South Africa and what is going on as far as the historical context of that. But the UK is certainly not innocent in the oppression of Black people, and it is the home of slavery. And even the bringing up of debates around the reparations during slavery, whether it's under the Labour government or whether it's under the Conservative government, the response has been the same, that it is watered down and then it is shunned away. I mean, some universities like in Glasgow have started paying some reparations, but it's not enough. It's not enough to redress the imbalances. I live in Oxford. Oxford is a city of two tales. It's divided into two different separate entities. You've got the workers, and then you've got the town and gown, which is the Oxford rich dominant part, and then you've got the workers who are working in factories, who are working in the car industries, who are working who are living in the inner city areas, which featured highly on in Alston's report of health inequalities. People are dying early in the inner cities. And it's quite interesting with, I'm going to go back to Tando again, that when you come back and visit South Africa and you live in England, people have this image that you are living in a very expensive country, or you are living large, because they think of the rate of the pound versus the rand. But when you talk about the living conditions, you can see that people are stunned, because there's this perception that when you are in Europe or when you are in America, life is far, far, far better than Africa, but yet poverty is poverty wherever you are. So I'll end on that.
Gabu, thank you very much for that. Now, you made a couple of comments, Al. I just want to pick up to introduce the discussion, if you like, and that is the number of young people that have come into this movement, which has been absolutely amazing. And the other one is how we sustain this movement. Now, I would suggest that it's about the demands that the movement make, and it has to widen those out to the very issue that you mentioned right at the end, that is the poverty. That ties in with COVID-19, where we know that the ruling class will not take care of people in terms of jobs, and they'll still come back to attack the health service. So there's a wide range of demands that we could make. And I think if we introduce those sorts of issues, revolutionary demands against the system, then that's what's going to stimulate young people, not to keep things as they are. And with climate change as well, demanding that we change the way society is organized, and I think that's one means of keeping the young people there and sustaining it. So, you know, Black Lives Matter is central, obviously, because that has been the catalyst to draw these people out onto the streets and to get involved in the campaign. So I'm going to open up the discussion now, and the first person I want to take is Datron. If you'd like to unmute yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Datrion. I am from New Orleans, Louisiana, and I'm here in representation of the striking sanitation workers in New Orleans, Louisiana. On May 5th, the 14 striking workers, they went on strike after notifying their employer that they wanted $150 in hazard pay. They wanted proper distribution of personal protective equipment, better working conditions, and a higher living wage of $15 per hour. Hopefully you all, when I wasn't on the call, you couldn't see my video. You saw my profile picture with the man holding the I'm a Man sign. This sign originated in 1968. This was the last strike of Dr. Martin Luther King. And we chose this sign not only to relate to 1968 striking workers, but because Black men in this country, in the United States, it seems that we have to continually tell people that Black lives matter and all lives matter and Black men matter and Black women matter. And in this same central theme, we also have to remind people, or these guys have had to remind the owners of this company, who are Black, that they are men and they deserve better and they deserve more fair treatment and better wages. And to not only remind ourselves, but to constantly, continually affirm this idea that Black people matter and all Black lives matter, and that you know, these guys are men. So currently, we're fighting against the privilege of these elitist bosses in this company. The company is called Metro Services Group. They are a locally owned African-American business. It's a sanitation company. They have a $10.7 million contract with the city of New Orleans. And what they do is they subcontract their work out. So it's Metro, then it's the subcontract employer, People Ready, and then it is the sanitation, the strikers or the hoppers who work for People Ready, kind of like a pipeline to Metro. And that is how Metro conducts their business. So, you know, we have been trying to fight against this idea that because this company is Black and because they have created jobs in our communities that, and they've also created jobs for Black men who have to check the box. And when we say check the box, we're talking about Black men who have maybe a past criminal record, or they don't have easy access to jobs in our communities. Yes, the company is Black owned. I saw your comment. Yeah, the company is Black owned. And so they've made comments like that they provide gainful employment to men who otherwise would not be employed elsewhere, which is just foolishness overall, because this company was started by a Black father and his 2 Black sons in a community of New Orleans. So what we've been doing in this strike is we're putting those elitist powers in this city, that Black business does not mean that Black exploitation is impossible. In fact, it happens more when the owner is Black, because the owner believes in that same idea that Black people are a little less likely to complain because we're just going to be grateful for the minimum. We're just going to be grateful for what is available, if there is anything available. So we've seen the use of the 13th Amendment loophole where the boss of this company or the owner of this company has used prison labor as a means to end the strike. So after the guys went on strike, they began using prison labor. They stopped doing that about 3 days after the strike started. And then they also started using people who were on parole. So these guys who were on parole, they live in this halfway house. And after they do their work, which could be a 16-hour work day for $9.25, after they go back to the halfway house, they then have to give 64% of their wages back to the halfway house. So if you break it all the way down, these guys who are already on parole, trying to be re-entered into society, they're living in a halfway house because they're on parole. They go out and they get this job, and then they end up making $3.35 per hour to pick up trash cans in the community and then hop back on a truck and ride up the street. And we're talking about the whole city of New Orleans is what they're picking up trash for. So we, you know, in our strike, we just want to be clear, and when we discuss oppression, that the oppressors are and can be Black people. It can be the people who are supposed to be the brothers, the people who are supposed to be the you know, we're supposed to be rubbing elbows with these guys in the communities. They should be accessible. And this exploitation is happening in front of our faces. And when people think about New Orleans, they think about Mardi Gras. You know, you think about the Essence Fest, you think about the Jazz Fest. But people who actually make those fests and the Mardi Gras happen, they're completely ignored. The hospitality workers, the Black and trans people who run a lot of those parades that go up and down the streets, the guys who follow behind those parades on the garbage truck to pick up all the beads that all the girls scream for, those people are completely ignored. And we're here in this strike at this time to just continue to say, hey, we're here, we matter. You know, this needs to change, and we need to change the idea that Black people matter a little less than everybody else, or less at all than anyone else. So we're doing the hard work, and we're trying to, you know, I'm so grateful to be a part of this discussion with such powerful people, and people who are making and affecting change. So we are definitely trying to do the same things.
Detrian, thank you very much for that. And yes, we are powerful collectively. That makes us powerful. And that comment you made about the Black-owned business, it sort of reminds me of Malcolm X and his approach to Black nationalism, where when he changed his perspective to become more of a rounded revolutionary, he then said, no, it's the system, it's the capitalist system that has to be challenged. And I think you brought up a really good example of those sort of shortcuts. If you just say, oh, we need the Black people to own the businesses and that's the solution, it's a step on the way, but it certainly isn't a solution. And I'm really grateful for you for bringing that into the discussion. Next is Cheryl wants to speak. If you can unmute yourself, please.
Well, I have to hold on a second.
Yeah, you're in. You're in.
Yeah. No, I raised my hand a couple of speakers ago, and now I have to sort of recollect my thoughts.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. No. It's just been so much. It's been remarkable. Well, I think, you know, I'm 65, and I'd say the majority, I don't know, about half of us or more in this call have been around a few decades, and we've seen a lot of movements come and go. And even, I mean, this movement, as others have said, has been different in many, many ways. I mean, it has, this current uprising has affected changes more quickly than anything I can remember seeing in my lifetime. But that doesn't mean that it will not also ebb and tend to fade for a period of time. The challenge, as many people have mentioned, is to unite it as an anti-capitalist movement, as a movement that is independent from the Democrats, two challenging things in themselves, and to create a democratic movement that will be able to debate the demands, that the kinds of things people have been mentioning. Because, so for instance, you know, during the, you know, protests a few weeks ago, I made a couple of signs about booting out Trump. One said, boot them out, lock them up, Trump and Pence out now. And I can't go to these demonstrations, unfortunately, because of my age, because my husband's etc., the COVID, all that. But I gave them to John, who's been very brave and been going to the, but that message at that time did not get a sort of a sounding. It was not what people wanted to think about. And I mean, the most important demand and the focal point, of course, was Black Lives Matter and no justice, no peace, you know, defund the police. And so I don't know how, what needs to take place to, again, not being able to be there, but I just think it's really critical for everyone to think about the fact that we've seen what I'll call single issue movements come and go over the years. And one of the reasons that they remain single issue movements, and as John mentioned, you know, the longshoremen on the West Coast having the one and done protests that show the potential power of the working class, but they don't go beyond that to actually build that mass movement. That could happen. Oh, damn, I forgot. Yeah, I mean, okay. I'll come back in later after I've collected my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Cheryl. Trish, would you like to go next? Unmute yourself, please.
Hello, sorry, hi, great. That it probably follows on a lot of what Cheryl was just saying, actually. I think it's fantastic meeting. Wow, what incredible speakers, incredible, thank you. I'm so glad I got on here. The fact is, I think we have got quite a lot of really important movements that, quite rightly, we don't want whataboutery. And I've been at a take the knee movement. I'm a white woman. I understand the last thing, whilst they're handing out the opportunity for people to speak, is needing a white woman to go up there talking about how we need to consider how this links to other issues, because I think that looks like whataboutery. It also looks like the attempt to dilute what is, I think, the two main things that I've always thought are the main kind of, if we like, the main tools of fascism are white supremacism and misogyny. I think they're the two main tools of fascism. And I think what we're seeing here is that fascism collects itself beautifully under capitalism, and as capitalism fails, fascism rises, and what they use is misogyny and racism and white supremacism. I don't think they're new tools, but I do think that we don't do enough joining up. And I was speaking today earlier to a person who's in Extinction Rebellion, for instance, on Zoom, on another meeting, on another chat, and you know, the fact is, the reason the planet's crumbling is because of capitalism. The reason black people have been oppressed since the beginning of slavery history was because of ownership and capitalism. And every single thing that's happened on the back of that, including every fascist kind of uprising, and we're seeing a huge move to fascism across the whole world, Modi, Bolsonaro, Duarte, everyone, Trump, and everything that's happening with potentially with rapture and all the things and tools that they use. Ultimately, it's about capitalism. And whilst I really believed I couldn't speak at the last time on Wednesday that I took the knee, because apart from anything else, 8 minutes on my knee just makes me feel so sad that somebody knew they were dying for that long. 8 minutes and 43 seconds, I think, that somebody knew they were dying for that long. And I felt worse that someone knew that they were killing someone for that long. So I also don't feel I can speak afterwards, because I'm so utterly horrified at the idea that humans can do that to each other, and do that to each other on film that we all can see, not just with George, but with the hundreds of others for hundreds of years, the thousands of others. And the fact is, we've watched this and we keep watching it, but until we realize, I think personally, that Black lives don't matter in capitalism, nor do working class lives. Working class people don't matter in capitalism, whether they're black or white, particularly if they're women and children. They're cheap, we're cheap. And essentially we're cheaper if we have black skin. And I just think that we've got to look at the big war here is class war. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Trish. I would just, again, I'm going to mention Malcolm X again, and the Black Panthers, because recently I've been rereading some of those texts, and I recommend that to anyone in terms of lessons for what's going on now. They were revolutionaries, both the organisation of the Black Panther Party and also Malcolm X. And he said very clearly early on, when he was a black nationalist and he was asked by a white woman, what can I do? What can I do? And he just basically brushed her away. But later on, he said that was the wrong approach, and that he would work with any revolutionists that were fighting for the same issue. So if we're fighting to overthrow capitalism, and that's what we're about, they will more than happily accept any support or ideas that you might want to contribute to that same goal. I'm convinced of that. And I think the nature of the movement, which is much broader, as one of our other speakers said, means everything's more open than it was in the past. Obviously, the white groups can't dominate the Black Lives Matter, but there's a contribution for revolutionaries to make to that discussion. So, David Hempson is next. Then don't forget to raise your hand electronically, please.
I was trying to, I'm not seeing it, so I messaged you, but I don't see.
I'm sorry, Julia, I'll call. Have you got to go soon or not, Julia?
No, I don't. I just wanted to respond to some of the things.
Thanks for letting me know.
Other people have said.
In the next two people, and then you'll be the third one.
Okay, that's great. Look, I'll be brief. Just remember this. This is a political breakout from the lockdown. We've been paralyzed for a whole period in fear of our lives. And we've had the state being developed in the States and throughout the world. The apparatus of the army and the police has been enormously expanded. As John has raised, the executive in America, but also everywhere else, has been ruling by decree or any other measure. And the people, we have been oppressed. But the sense of compression and the breakout has come from some of the most oppressed people, because the oppressor will not change. And for the first time now in history, we can see the documentation, we can count the minutes and seconds that Black lives lost under this regime. But what is happening is an enormously optimistic mood among people, but particularly among the youth. And some marvelous points have been made about this movement being something different from the 60s. Nothing wrong with the 60s, but it has been broadened. And I have to say it has been deepened. It is much broadly based now among the youth, which just is not going to tolerate, you know, the way in which their parents have been treated. We've seen now an upsurge which is unprecedented in the States. I can't think of anything quite like it because it moves on and on. It reminds me just to think a little more, you know, across nations. South Africa went through a period in the 1980s and even into the 90s of what we termed rolling mass action. It moved from the youth to the workers, from factory occupations back into the streets. It was unstoppable for a while until the ANC became unbanned. It's the African National Congress, and then negotiations started, and the youth were betrayed and the workers were betrayed. We know that, but we are still in that struggle. And I think with the contributions that I've heard now from Tado and from others, and I know there are many more I'd love to have heard, you know, we've got the perception now that we have to root out the system right from the base and to be able to get rid of it completely. So we've broken out politically, and we are not going to look to the reforms that we've had in the past. Reform is spoken again and again. But where is the reform in Minneapolis when you see the knee on the neck, you know, for that period? Suddenly we see that reforms are totally unsubstantial, and in fact, they've not actually taken place. And that's why I think the discussion is quite rich. We've had a number of points we've not really nailed down, like removing the police from the unions, showing the way in which the police have acted against workers and against all oppressed groups. I think we've got a lot more to say, but I'm more interested now to conclude and maybe to hear Julie and others respond. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. Next, the two next speakers on the list are Alistair and Julia. So Alistair's next. If you could unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, hi. I'm Alistair O'Gara. I'm from Richmond, Virginia. And I just want to say thanks, everyone. It's been a wonderful experience being here. Much of you being much more experienced than I am, just getting out of high school. I just wanted to kind of ask, since everyone seems to be on a similar or the very same page about the connection of capitalism and the fact that there are many different intersections and places oppression can come from, like in South Africa when white power structures can be enforced by a black man, or black businesses here in the US. I want to just ask of the more experienced people here so that I can learn more and apply it to myself. Who are we saying this message to? Who are we trying to make hear it? What does the political struggle look like when we acknowledge all of these things? When we acknowledge that the union power structure is shackled to the Democrats for the most part, and that our strikes on the West Coast are fleeting. I just think I'm a bit confused at the disconnect between how advanced and just how experienced and wonderful what everyone is saying, and just the feeling of isolatedness after you go home after a protest in your city. It's just that I'm a little unsure where this optimism that we have is supposed to go. And, you know, I just agree on almost every point that's been brought up. And I'm just not sure what to do with it. So I would like to ask everyone just kind of here, if capitalism is the root of everything, if we know that oppression can come from many places and that we are suffering heavily, that Black lives don't matter as much, that Black queer lives don't matter as much, how are we taking that to the street? Thank you.
Thanks for that, Alistair. And it's great that you put that question, because it is an important question to put. Julia, you're next. If you can unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, so I'd like to first thank everyone, the speakers and the contributors, for really enriching this discussion. When we were told, you know, we had a few minutes to speak, it's like, what do I say? What do I talk about? I'm gonna miss some things. But it was good because I feel like a lot of other people said many of the other things that I thought and that I wanted to say, but, you know, couldn't expand upon for the interest of time. So I do want to speak to Alistair's point, but I wanted to before then talk about the ways in which we're oppressed, and particularly talking about white supremacy and patriarchy. I think that this movement has really blown up those issues more than many other movements have previously. If we look at the Combahee River Collective that was written many years ago, it was attempting to bring together the issues of racism, as well as racism in the feminist movement and sexism in the Black Power movement, and the ignoring of lesbian and queer women, Black women in particular. And this movement has really brought out more of those issues, more issues about ableism, more issues about trans people being murdered, particularly, for example, Tony McDade, who was a trans man who was murdered recently. Today in New York, there's a Pride March. Tens of thousands of people are in the streets now discussing that issue. And I think it's for us, particularly, as we've talked about, to bringing those issues together for a fight against capitalism. And it doesn't mean that, because a lot of times we hear what's called class reductionism, which is just like, okay, all the issues are capitalism, therefore that's all we're talking about, and then we'll get to like issues of racism and patriarchy like sometime at some point, or that it's like some kind of aside or, you know, isolation, when in reality that is how capitalism is able to maintain itself. And in Inglewood, where I'm from, you know, we have a Black mayor, we have Black and Latino mayor and city council people who are ushering in gentrification, who are police and former police, who are evicting Black people, many Black elderly people, as much as they can. And so those people, you know, they're the face of white supremacy. And so I'm glad that the folks, especially from South Africa, were talking about that, because, and New Orleans, because that's exactly what we're seeing. And I think that there's going to be more attempts like that. We're going to have more Black, queer people in positions of power that enforce white supremacy as a consolation, as a concession. We're going to have more of those faces. And so it's important for us to really point out that these people's social role, their political role, is to be oppressive. It's not just about training people or training them to be nicer or to help us or whatever. It has nothing to do with training. It's because their actual position is violent. Their actual position is racist. Their actual position is sexist. That is what their job is. Now, the fact that you have rainbows on cop cars in West Hollywood does not change the fact that they really are. They're rainbows. Yes, they are. So they will kick your ass and throw you in the back seat with a rainbow on the car. Like, that does not change the fact that they are oppressive. So I think it's super important that we're also like, this is a product of capitalism and imperialism. That's what it is. If Hillary Clinton had won the election, she would have been just as murderous as Trump, maybe even worse, because she's very institutionalized. She would have been very methodical in her assassinations, like she was of Berta Carceras and other people. And so it is true. It's a divide issue, but it's also a super exploitation issue. So you have certain people who get paid less, as was talked about, Black women getting paid less. And not just that, but part of the destabilization is encouraging that attack within our communities. So Black serial killers in LA, like the grim sleeper Lonnie Franklin, who killed maybe 100 women. He worked for the Los Angeles Police Department. He was a sanitation worker. The person who killed Oluwatoyin, as a Black man who killed her. And I think that there's going to be more of those kind of isolated picking off of people by white supremacists and by Black reactionaries as a way to be able to attack. That's probably what happened in Louisville, as Tia had talked about. And so the question is, what's next? What do we do? I mean, I'm very inspired by the movements that are happening. I think that we are living in an unprecedented year of unprecedented economic struggle, unprecedented pandemic. So I think this movement is also going to replicate that unprecedented nature. The question will be, what do we do about those things? And I think part of it is having these discussions and creating more spaces for us to discuss, to debate. We all kind of are on the same page in terms of being against oppression and capitalism and imperialism and how those things need to be fought. But then how we enact those on the day-to-day, I think, is going to be what we really need to be able to doing. So not just getting together once, but getting together consistently with other countries, hearing other people's experiences and cities. What's happening in your place? What are they doing in your place? How do we support you? How do we support each other? I think that that's going to be what we're going to have to forage, because what also has happened is the people of the 1960s and 70s in the United States and in other countries too were assassinated and jailed. They intentionally broke those ties away so that we wouldn't know what some of those people went through. And there are some people who are on this call who I know, who I invited, who were part of the Black Power movement of the 60s and 70s. And they wanted to eliminate us to be able to learn those lessons that they did, the mistakes they made and the things they did right. They wanted to totally disconnect us from those struggles. And so we're gonna have to do the work of relearning some of the things they did and not replicating some of the other things that weren't accomplished, like fighting patriarchy and transphobia and heterosexism, like just fighting against class-wide demands is what the Sanders folks call it, and not talking about racism. And I think that creating those spaces and creating those things in our unions, like myself, we're doing the No Cops in Our Unions campaign in my union, doing those things so that we make those connections and really denouncing capitalism and imperialism as well as white supremacy and patriarchy simultaneously, that all those things have to be discussed together and all those things have to be combated together. So, you know, I appreciate everything folks have said. I wanted to say to the sister in New Orleans, one of my comrades who's in Argentina, who are sanitation workers, had sent a message of solidarity. And I wanted to also extend a message of solidarity to you in the struggle that you're involved in there. It's very helpful to know about that it's Black owned and that they're exploiting workers who were incarcerated because they know that those workers can't get other jobs in other places. And that they're using the fact, like we have our Black mayor, he's like, when people criticize me for, you know, stealing money, and he like hit 3 people with his car, like it's just wild. If you ever Google Inglewood Mayor Butts, you could see all the like drama and craziness. But whenever people criticize him, he says, oh, I'm Black. I'm a Black man, and that's why they're targeting me. You know, that's what it is. And it's like, no, actually, you're the face of white supremacy. And the fact that you have Black skin does not change your social role, which is exploiting us. So just wanted to make those points. Appreciate folks listening and participating and sharing your very valuable experiences, especially the folks from South Africa and Oxford, New Orleans, and John. Appreciate all the things that you have said. We just need to keep doing more of this and doing these deeper dive analyses, you know, and spreading it to working class oppressed people.
Julia, thanks again for another great contribution. Now you mentioned sharing experiences. I'm going to suggest that Wynne gets together a reading list, a background reading list, because I've started doing that. Seize the Time, which is about the Black Panthers, and also this one from Black Panther members who are still alive, because a lot of them were killed. And I think we need to get a reading list together, because those who are still around, and the books that have been written in the 70s also will give us a lot of lessons, because they drew conclusions from their successes, but also from where they went wrong as well. So the movement doesn't have to go through and make the same mistakes again. So that's the suggestion I want to make. Ed, you're next. There's 3 people after Ed, and we've been going 2 hours, but most people are saying on the chat or indicating that the level of the meeting in terms of the contributions is so good. I think we're keeping many of the participants going. So I'm going to go for another 20, 25 minutes at least. Obviously, if people have to go, but I think the nature of this meeting deserves that we carry on for a little while longer. So Ed?
Thank you, Dave. I think Julia's contribution just now really highlights an important feature of capitalism, which is that it's expert at taking little aspects of protest movements and isolating them and elevating them above the sort of main revolutionary impetus behind those movements, and then using them to justify its own existence and even make profits. I mean, the environmental movement, for example, there are all kinds of Tories in Britain who have got little schemes going on that have got a kind of decorative aspect, that they are in favor of environmental concerns. And it was the same. Yeah, it's the same against. I mean, people talking about the 1960s. There were loads and loads of revolutionary ideas that bubbled up in the 1960s, and you found that capitalist clothes manufacturers were able to make profits out of bits of them. And I think this ability of capitalism to kind of devour and consume parts of the revolutionary movement so that it actually protects itself from the full impact of those movements is something that relates to Alistair's question. Alistair from Richmond, Virginia. I thought it's a very good question. Who are we trying to make hear our message? Where is our optimism supposed to go? I think it's a brilliant question, because this movement is not about calling to some liberal leader in office and asking him, or perhaps her, to bring in some changes, to be kinder to people. The answer to who are we trying to make hear our message is every oppressed person on the planet, every exploited person on the planet, everyone who is suffering injustice, because we don't want some big, generous benefactor up at the top to introduce a few more changes so that they can be subsumed into the capitalist system. We want to overthrow the whole lot. We want to put in place a system of government that is based on the democracy of working people, not based on one vote every 4 or 5 years, whilst meanwhile the billionaires tell the politicians what they're supposed to do. We want a democracy based on communities who understand what people need. And I can see it in my own community here in Northumberland, in the north of England, even in this COVID crisis. The capacity of working people to plan the economy and do things differently. There are food outlet shops in our local high street who can't get customers because of the lockdown. There are communities on estates who are organising 20 or 30 homes to order food and then informing those shops, and they're sending up a truck with food for 20 or 30 homes. That is, at the most elementary level, working people planning the economy to benefit working people. And what we are saying, this is the answer to the question, you know, where is our optimism supposed to go? Our optimism is supposed to go into the fact that that billions of working people across the globe are capable of planning and organizing society. And we have the opportunity now with this new movement, with this new generation coming into activity, of overthrowing the powers that try to defend capitalism. I'll just end on this point. I was very interested in hearing Datrian talk about what the garbage workers are doing in New Orleans. I was on the demonstration, the Women's March, the day after Trump was inaugurated in New Orleans. And New Orleans, probably most of the comrades on this meeting know, New Orleans has got a very large black population, but most of the march were white. It was a very, very big march, incidentally. My estimation was there were about 70 or 100,000 people on that march, a very, very optimistic and spontaneous march. And as I was involved in it, I was talking to a few black young people. Why aren't there more black people involved in this march? And the attitude was, well, we're not really sure if it's going to get anywhere. You know, and actually one or two of them asked me, well, why are you're British, why are you on this march? And I said, well, actually, I've got two mixed race grandchildren, and it's just as much in my interests to get rid of Trump as it is for anyone else on this march, because you can't have a racist in charge of a big country like the USA. And what we're seeing now is the coming onto the arena of politics, the more oppressed strata of society who've never thought it was worth getting involved before because they thought that their efforts wouldn't add up to anything. And because of that, we really have a brand new opening. That's why we have optimism. And I hope I've gone some way to helping answer the question that Alistair raised, that we're not appealing to anybody on high to introduce a few changes. We're appealing to everybody down the bottom to rise up and change things on behalf of all of us.
Thank you very much, Ed. Very rousing. And John, you say you've got to go soon. How soon before you got to go? You're muted, John.
In about another 5 minutes or so. I see also that we're losing people. So I don't know how much longer you intend to keep the meeting going.
I did.
I've got about another 5 minutes that I can stay.
Okay.
5 or 10 minutes, something like that.
I'll take, oh, sorry, someone's lowered their hand now. Themos, and then it'll be you, John.
Well, thank you. I think it's been a very, very informative meeting and very important to hear all this. But the main thing is that I think we can get out of it is how important this Black Lives Matter movement is. It is a movement that we haven't seen for a long time, mainly because it's not confined in America, but it's spilling over internationally in such a big manner. Even in Cyprus, for those of you who don't know, Cyprus is just a small island in the Mediterranean of less than 1 million people. and with a very intense national problem. And you wouldn't expect that this sort of thing would have a direct effect. And yet, we have seen demonstrations as in the last period in defense of immigrants, in defense of asylum seekers that are being harassed by the government, and this quite spontaneously, with young people coming out in numbers that we never expected. We're not talking about hundreds of thousands, we're talking about 600, 700 people coming out, which is something very important in Cyprus. And this, we think that is partly a result of the general atmosphere that is created worldwide because of this great movement. One thing that I am worried, I think it could link up with Alistair O'Gara's point, is that I'm not sure we understand this movement yet sufficiently enough to help or be helped effectively. In Cyprus, certainly we underestimated what was going on. We didn't manage to have a close link with this movement. And I get the impression that this is going on everywhere in the world. And I think it's not enough to give our own explanations that we have worked out in a different period and say just that it's capitalism, so let's fight capitalism. We have to link up with them. We have to understand it. We have to learn from it. And this is the sort of thing I would like us to give more attention to. And there are also dangers in this movement, especially while it remains a one-issue movement. And it's going to remain that for a long time, it seems. And I have been reading an article in the Economist lately, which was really damning about American society, about the extreme racial inequalities that exist, and they were very critical of this, and they were suggesting that this has to be redressed because this is what justifies all this movement. And when I was just wondering why the Economist was doing that, suddenly it struck me that, of course, this is what they are going to do. Because the only way for them to get out of this is to jump on the bandwagon, is try to embrace the movement themselves and try to turn white workers against black workers. And this is something that is, we should be very, very careful not to let it happen. We have seen in Britain a lot of magnificent movements as well. I mean, the Bristol event with tearing down of the statue of the slave trader and throwing it into the river. It was a magnificent symbolic event. But we should be careful there as well. I mean, the reason that it was brought down, it wasn't because he was a slave trader, but in my opinion, it was because the same issues continue to exist, the same suppression of black people continues to exist. And it was this anger that brought this up. And we should not turn this movement into a hunt for all criminals and for all perpetrators of racism. We should be very careful to understand what is happening, embrace this movement completely, and reject any sort of useless criticism of these actions. But then we should be careful not to turn these actions as the purpose of the movement. In any case, I would much prefer British society to remember its colonial past and make sure that it has to deal with it every day by redressing the injustices that happen today, rather than try to get rid of the past and forget what is going on today. Well, that's more or less what I have to say.
Thanks very much, Femos. John, you want to come back on the discussion? And
yes, I'd
I
like
just want to say before we start, John, you'll be the last speaker because of the time, and Roger's just going to talk after you just about WIN, Workers International Network, about the organisation and what we do. So it's not going to be a big, long speech. So John, fire away.
Thank you, Dave. So first of all, just to clarify, I am also a member of the Workers International Network. And also for anybody that's interested, my blog site is Oakland Socialist, that's one word, oaklandsocialist.com. And we all, I think, have agreed that, as Malcolm X put it, you cannot have capitalism without racism. And he also said, you show me a capitalist and I'll show you a bloodsucker. And that then leads to the question of a socialist revolution, because I think we all also agree that socialism won't come in a nice, gentle, easy stroll down the primrose path. And if you look at all the great books on revolutionary history, from C.L.R. James's Black Jacobins to Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, they spent a great deal of their time in those books analyzing and explaining what was happening within the ruling class, or classes, if you have an aristocracy also, and how the interactions within the ruling class were reflected within the capitalist regime. And that is an essential part of developing a revolutionary perspective in a concrete way. And it's essential that we, as socialist revolutionaries, bring that analysis into the wider working class movement. We can't forget about that. And now, on this question of the economy, as I said, you know, I find it, I had thought for a while that maybe they'd be able to keep the economy rolling for a little bit longer. But when you look at what happened, how the economy recovered a bit in May, it really does seem like it cannot continue beyond July. Maybe it will, maybe it'll continue for another month or so. But I do think that most certainly before the November elections, that there will be that new storm added to the perfect storm that we have. And that will help bring the class questions more to the fore, not at the expense of the questions of racism, male supremacy, and so on, but to bring it all together like the hub of a wheel. And so I would just like to also mention, I don't know if you can see, this is a sign that I've been carrying to all the protests. And I have to say that it gets a very, very good response. I usually have, when I go to any of those protests, I usually have half dozen different people come up and ask to take a picture of that sign. And it's not just, well, I guess I would say that that sign, I think, really captures an underlying sentiment that a lot of people, both workers and young people, have. I'd like to make a couple of points. Also, as far as the issue of Black Lives Matter here, at least in the US, I've seen in a number of different instances where they have been very clear about including women into that. The comrade mentioned, one of the comrades mentioned, I think in South Africa, that issue is somewhat ignored. Also, the question of LGBTQ people. And again, at least in some instances, that issue has been very explicitly and intentionally included into the movement. I'm not saying it's perfect or anything, but I don't think it's, at least here, I haven't seen it excluded in general. Now, I'd like to make one point. I'm sorry that Jack Gerson is gone, because he evidently is has links has links, close links with Jack Heyman, who plays an important role in the Longshoremen's Union. Because what should have come out of that strike, the one-day port shutdown, what should have come out of it was that the longshoremen, that Local 10 should have called a cross-union rank-and-file committee whose purpose was to bring the rest of the labor movement into this Black Lives Matter movement and beyond. And absent that, then there should have been an organized call to build a rank-and-file committee for that purpose. And those who were in direct contact with Jack Heyman or with Jack Gerson, maybe he can be encouraged to raise that with Heyman. I think that that is the next logical and necessary step. Now, on this question of the police unions, and every day we are reminded that the police are not part of the working class, never have been and never can be. And this issue of opposition to the police unions being in the AFL-CIO is not just a matter of general principle. We know that in the United States, workers tend to be very, very pragmatic. And again, Jack Gerson had mentioned this anti-union member of the Oakland Board of Ed, Jamoki Hodge, who has pressed for getting the police out of the Oakland School District. But where is that going to lead? If the labor movement accepts that the police so-called unions are part of the labor movement, then it will inevitably lead to, if we're going to weaken the police union, so-called unions, then we should weaken the other public sector unions. And in fact, the Wall Street Journal has had advocating exactly that. And so there is a very concrete and practical reason why the AFL-CIO should completely disassociate itself with these police so-called unions and say, look, they have nothing to do with the labor movement. Because the move to weaken the police unions, otherwise, we will be severely weakened in our ability to prevent that movement to turn on the public sector unions in general. Now, on this question of electoral fraud and voter suppression, and we saw what happened when Bush stole the election from Gore, and the Democratic Party and their representatives in the working class, which is the union leadership, prevented any kind of mass movement in the streets in Florida from happening. And they've done the same thing over and over again. Now, if there is such blatant voter fraud and voter suppression this time, hopefully a movement will come forward, will develop despite their opposition. But I think that that is one thing that those of us in the movement here in the United States, that we have to be agitating and explaining that particular issue. I thought what Datrion said about Black business does not mean that Black exploitation is impossible. In fact, it can happen. And it reminds us of the basis of the class basis of oppression, and that capitalists will always side with the rest of their class before the masses of their, quote, own people. And also, I wanted to comment on what Ed Bober had raised, that example he gave, which I thought was a great example of how the community is kind of organizing food distribution. And I think another step that is really essential in that is for the urban community through this sort of program to link up with the rural communities, because that is a way for urban people and urban working class people to start to more directly link up with the issues of environmental destruction. Finally, like I say, you know, we're reminded again of what Malcolm X said, that you cannot have capitalism without racism. And we should also remind ourselves of what Fred Hampton said, that we fight racism with international proletarian revolution. And that is the message. Obviously, if we had had 4 times this size number of people on this call, we still would not be able to, we would try as much as we could to bring those messages, not just in a general abstract way, but concretely in terms of the specific issues and the specific developments that are occurring to the wider working class, but we simply wouldn't have the power. So we have to try to bring it to those elements within the movement that we can, for instance, in the way that I was advocating as far as building a rank and file committee of union members and supporters to try to bring the labor movement on a more massive basis into this movement. Those are some of the main things that I would advocate.
John, thank you very much. A very thoughtful summing up of some of the many issues that arose in the meeting. Roger, so the meeting proper in terms of that subject is finished, but Roger would just like to say a few words about WIN, our organisation.
Right, thank you, comrades. I think we'll all agree this has been a really inspiring and a historic meeting. Most of the comrades who spoke were black comrades, women comrades, all of them working class comrades. We had people at the meeting from what I counted 8 or 9 countries. And I think it's been also the level of discussion and the direct voice of the struggles that are taking place was absolutely present at this meeting, like at very few meetings I've been to. Now that's not surprising because the meeting has taken place at a time of existential crisis for humankind, a time of unprecedented worldwide protest, of mass uprisings everywhere, and most notably in the very citadel of world capitalism, the USA. And it was precisely in anticipation of times like this that the Workers' International Network first came together 20 years ago. We make no pretensions, as so many left sectarians do, to constitute any kind of self-appointed revolutionary vanguard. We are just a rapidly expanding network of activists and militants in countries spread across 4 continents. Over the course of this pandemic and this lockdown, we've held weekly meetings on a range of vital subjects, on the world economic catastrophe, on agribusiness and the pandemic, on Black Lives Matter, on China, on France, on the crisis in the British Labour Party, and on many other topics. If you're not already signed up, please contact us to join our mailing list to keep you informed of our forthcoming meetings. I think a lot of us here would feel that what we need to do as one of our meetings soon is a continuation of this crucial discussion, because there's a lot more experiences that comrades want to report, and we can learn so much from one another. Can you please also, you read our journal, which is called On the Brink. Read our recent documents like this one, 2020 Vision, World Perspectives. And it's only online, I can't show you a cover, but Labour and the Struggle for Socialism, which came out just a couple of weeks ago. And look out for our new document, which is coming soon, on the consequences of the pandemic. All of these and much more are available online. So can I appeal to comrades also to visit our website, which is www.onthebrink.online. Because above all, we all need to learn from one another's victories, setbacks and experiences. So let's make sure we keep in touch. I hope to see you at the next meeting. You'll get notices through the email, so make sure we have your email addresses. Keep in touch. And as they say, venceremos.
Sono i confini, rosse bandiere,